Hi. Most of the time, what is our goal in the end game? Pawn promotion or preventing our opponent's pawn promotion? That's what we are going to learn today. We are going to learn some fundamentals of pawn endings. But before that, we are going to learn two things which is very important in king and pawn end games: opposition and key squares. What is opposition? The domination between two opposing kings is called opposition. Basically, using opposition, you can create an entry for your king, and also you can fight the opponent's king from entering. For example, in this position, we can play king d4 and we can win the opposition. If black king goes to c6, we can enter via e5 square. If black king goes to e6, we can enter via c5 square. So you can create an entry for your king by winning opposition. Next, key squares. In this position, our pawn is on e2. So the key squares for white's king are d4, e4, and f4. If somehow white manages to reach any of these key squares, white will be able to support his pawn to the promotion in a forcing way. Another example, now the pawn is on e4. So the key squares for white's king are d6, e6, and f6. But if your pawn enters the opponent's territory, you will get six key squares. So if your king manages to enter any of these key squares, you can make a pawn promotion in a forcing way. Now let's learn how to make use of the position and key squares in the real battle. We are going to learn about the three important king and pawn endgames. First one, king behind the pawn or king and pawn in the same rank. That's no big difference. And the second one is king front of the pawn. And the third one is corner pawn. First, let's learn about the king behind the pawn. In this position, white has an extra pawn. Even we can win the opposition by playing king d3, but still this is a draw because our pawn is on e3. So the key squares are d5, e5, and e5. So if black plays the accurate moves, it's not possible for white to win this position. For example, black goes to e5, e4. Obviously, we don't have entry for our king, so we are pushing our pawn. Here, king d6 and king e6 both are fine, but in some position, your king must stay in the pawn file. If it comes out of the pawn file, it will lose the game. So, I don't want to confuse you by explaining all these things in one video. So, just stay in the pawn file. And now we can just go for the opposition. E5 check. You can go to e6 or e7, both are fine. If the king goes to e4, king e6 opposition. Once again, there's no entry for the king. If king d5, king d7. Once again, we're not allowing the king to enter. Check. King e8, king d6, king d8. Check. Obviously, only move king e8. Now, white has only one move to protect this pawn, which is king e6, and it results in stalemate, which is a draw. I hope you know what is stalemate. Stalemate means if you don't have any legal moves, also there is no check, that is stalemate. For example, if black has another pawn here, it's not stalemate. But in this position, black doesn't have any legal moves. Also, there is no check to the black's king. So this is stalemate, which is a draw. So if the king is behind the pawn or pawn and king is in the same rank, by playing accurate moves, the other player can save the game with a draw. Now let's learn about the second position, king front of the pawn. There are two types of position in king front of the pawn. One is you have the opposition, another one is your opponent has the opposition. For example, in this position, black wins the opposition. This is white to play, so you can't make any progress as black maintains the opposition. At some point, you have to push the pawn, and now this is king behind the pawn, which is a draw. But if you win the opposition when your king is in front of the pawn, you can make a pawn promotion in a forcing way. For example, if the king goes to d5, you can go to the key square f4. Yeah, as the pawn is on e2, these three squares are the key squares. If the king goes to f5, you can go to this key square d4. And if king e6, you must play king e4 to win the opposition. If you play the pawn, and once again it will become a draw. because black wins the opposition and you cannot make any progress. So here you must play king e4 to win the opposition, and king f6, king d5, king e7, king e5, king d7, king f6, king d8, e4, king e8, e5, king e8. Here you can just play pawn e6. There's no problem because after king e8, you can just play e7 and squeeze the king out and make a pawn promotion. Now we are going to learn about the third position, king and the corner. With corner pawns, your king is front of the pawn or behind the pawn. Nothing matters if you allow your opponent's king to these two squares. They can simply make a draw by playing in these squares. For example, a5, yes, you have the opposition, but no use. You cannot do anything. So this is just a draw. Same rule applies for h pawn. But if you manage to prevent black from entering these squares, you can win this. For example, king b6, king b7. Once again, you have to play king b7 because if you go for a5, king c8, once again it's a draw. You cannot stop king b8. If you try to stop king b8 by playing king a7, then black king will block white's king and your king cannot escape now. So this is draw. For example, if you go to b6, now my king can enter b8. So if you go to a8, then king c7. Now black stalemated white. So here you have to play king b7 to prevent black from entering c8 square. And this is winning. Black cannot do anything. So these are the fundamentals of king and pawn endings. You will get these portions at all levels. So practice these portions with your friends or with computers from defending side and also winning side so that you will get better understanding about this portion, which is very, very, very important. As you watch till the end, I have a bonus for you. I have given you some pawn endings similar to this video. So you test yourself by solving those puzzles. The link is in description. Do subscribe for more chess improvement content. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.